Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut channel. So guys, today we're looking at a 2011 Avalon that a viewer brought me. He bought this a few months ago. He has some concerns with it, but he also wants a full inspection. He just had another shop do a bunch of work to it. He's not really happy with the work. He wanted checked, and we'll go through that as we progress in the video. But before we start the inspection, the paint is not the greatest on this thing. Let me show you a little close-up here. You know, shiny part and then kind of fades. I believe this hood's been painted. We'll look at that, and then we'll look at the interior, which did have a few issues. You'll see that. But let's start our inspection here. Okay, well, the first thing is the engine cover is missing. That's interesting, and I see this connector on the coil is broken. Well, that's common, but let's look around here and see what we got. So let's start from here. Coolant looks low. This car is warm. We'll look at that. We got a power steering return line leak here, and the power steering flow is actually pretty low. See how low that is? And we'll look at that. We got this power steering line that's super common leaking here. And we are going to look at the head gasket on this, because this is a year that head gaskets can be an issue. See a little seepage there from the cam tower right there. It's not a big issue. Battery is very dirty, needs some cleanup. Terminals are okay. I see a little piece of tape here. What is that? Oh, well, I mean, if the clip is missing, there's a clip that holds this here. If it's broken, let's just put tape on it. That's not good. This clip would look like this. This guy right here. It's missing, and yeah, tape will do. That's not good. Let's look around. Brake fluid looks pretty dark there. But initial impressions, they're not too bad. Let's look at the top of the radiator here. I don't see any major leaks yet. We're going to have to investigate our coolant there. Starter is original. Let's take the oil cap here, see how everything looks inside. Well, that doesn't look too bad. Looking at the gear here, that doesn't look too bad. Okay. Well, we kind of get an idea. Another thing is this oil. Oh, this has been replaced. Cool. Do you see that oil line right there? Typically is half rubber, half metal. This one's all metal, so that's good. Okay, we have some issues. Power steering leak, that air filter housing, coolant is low, so we're gonna have to investigate that. But let's check the head gasket, and I'll show you how we check these initially from the top, and then when we lift the car up, we'll look underneath. So what's common on the 2GR as it ages and as it has miles is the head gasket leak and external leaks. Not it's going to mix oil and coolant. They leak externally. So the front bank you can check actually without lifting the car. The back bank you need to lift the car. But usually I use a little mirror and we see it. It's really hard to do on video. So I'm going to use my borescope here. I'll record this so you guys can see it as well. Okay, so we're going to put our borescope right here where we can see the edge of the head gasket. Get my angle right. There we go. So I'm looking across it. Here's your head gasket. I got a little spot right there that I'm not too worried. That's actually coolant coming out of the head gasket, but it's not too bad. Not to a point where I would be concerned. But we'll look at the back. But that, you see that crust? I'll point at it in the video. That's how they start, externally leaking, and it gets really bad as we progress. But this is not terrible at all. This is just a tiny speck. Maybe a couple drops have come out. But we'll check the back as we go. Before we lift the car up, we have a general idea of what's going on here. We'll continue our inspection. Let's take the wheels, look underneath it. Before we continue our inspection, let's look at the interior. And things are a little worn here. And the seats are tore up. And this is something actually surprising for me to see. Look at the miles real quick. 177, 611. And I don't know what happened with these seats. The previous owner told the current owner that they've had some golf clubs or something, but things are even worse in the back. I've never really seen, I've owned an Avalon like this, 2008. This is pretty rough. The car doesn't look extremely dirty, but the seats are really in bad shape. And then the headliner, I'm looking here, looks like it was glued. It sagged and it was glued. That's also not really that common with these, especially 2011, maybe 2005, but this interior have seen better days, unfortunately. But what are you gonna do? That's the current owner has actually told me he's looking at seeing if he can replace these seats, but they're pretty expensive. And this is a better leather, you know, on the Avalon. They're nicer interiors. Steering wheel also has a lot of wear on the leather here. But what are you gonna do? Lift the car. Let's lift the car up and see what we see. Okay, let's look at things here. Lots of shiny parts here. First, we have brand new brakes. They're aftermarket. And the calipers also look like they've been replaced. Wondering if these are original. You know what? They're not. Because I'm looking at this rubber. This is stuff that's really hard to tell from camera probably, but this is, I don't think this might be an aftermarket reman, but it looks like good quality paint. It is a reman because I see the advix here. This is an original caliper that was rebuilt. But let's look at everything else. Strut, this is torn. That's not an issue as long as the strut's not leaking. I mean, it wouldn't make sense to tear this whole strut apart just to replace this rubber boot. That's not a good idea. Looks like new front sway bar link. Also aftermarket, it's from the color of it. The original ones are silver. CV boots are good. I don't see any leaks on the driver's front side. Lower control arm bushing. Looks okay. Has a little bit of that typical age tearing. Looks like somebody put some grease on them or something. That's not gonna help it at this point, but transmission on the side, I don't see any leaks, so that's good. The mount doesn't look like it's collapsed. So that's good. Everything is looking all right. I see outer tie rod that is new. This one is gonna be tougher to tell if it's aftermarket or not. Possibly aftermarket. I'm guessing if everything else is aftermarket, this is probably aftermarket. Let's go look at the back real quick. Again, more shiny stuff. Wonder why they replaced the calipers. Oh, you know what? I don't think this caliper has been replaced. Just the holder, which is interesting. It's just a chunk of metal. Don't know what would happen to it. We got the same thing with the strut. The insulator is torn, but so I get this up. Strut itself is not leaking, so that's good. Again, not worth it just to do this, but this is something that happens a lot. The insulator gets jammed in the bump stop. That's something. We have noise issues in the back. I drove it, I didn't feel anything. But everything else, rear sway bar links are original, struts are original, everything is looking good here. Brake lines, they have a little bit of rust starting there at that tip that is not coated, but everything else looks okay. This bushing is somewhat common from Avalons to go bad and make noise, but this one, I drove it, it's fine. Let's look at the passenger rear. Same thing here, calipers original, bracket. And this is something that, come on, why do we do this? So, most Toyotas with this style parking brake inside the rotor hat, there is a plug here that this is where you would adjust the parking brake. You know, you put it at 6 o'clock position, and now you can adjust the parking brake. But there's a cap here, rubber plug, that keeps rust and water from going inside. And aftermarket shops, some of them, they love to leave this off. I'm like, it came with the car, just swap it across. But they don't do that. Please don't do that to your car. We got same thing here, strut's not leaking, insulator's torn. This bump stop doesn't have the insulator jammed in it. Brake line looks okay. Sway bar link. And then here's that level sensor for the headlight leveling system. This has HID headlights. I believe this is a limited trim. Everything is looking good here, but let's go to the front, and this is where we're going to spend some time. Again, aftermarket everything. Aftermarket inner and outer tie rod, and boy, is this boot looking great. That's better. And same thing with the control arm bushing, some grease on there, and the insulator is not as torn here. It does have tears, but not completely separated. Strut looks okay. But initially looking here, we do have some leaks that we're gonna need to look into. Let's do our inspection underneath. Okay, so the first things first, the front timing cover. That doesn't look like it's leaking, but what is leaking is the inner CV boot on the passenger side. You see the grease slung everywhere. This is commonly misdiagnosed actually as a front cover leaking, but this is what this is. And the head gasket, I am looking at it, and I hope you can as well see it. I don't see any leak from the head gasket in the back. So again, a little bit of wetness, but nothing crazy. The transmission is fully dry. Let's look at that. Ooh, that is a problem right there. Hope you can see it. Right at the bottom of the radiator, we got some pink crust. That is the beginning of a leaky radiator. Not something I'm super concerned about at the moment, but we are going to let the owner know that this is something that's going to need addressing soon. Otherwise, let's look at the power steering. That's not leaking. This, if you see a little bit of haze there, that is not actually a concern. That's not an active leak, it's just a little bit. We're more concerned about the boots. This one is going to be hard to tell because it was replaced. But everything else underneath the car looks okay. Not severely rusted, even though this is an Illinois car. This is very typical. The exhaust is, that'll never separate and never work again. The brake lines are good. I don't see anything concerning underneath the car. And of course, the rubber plugs are missing, the body plugs, and you can already, really hard to see, but there's some rust starting inside. This is not good. How about the other side? Oh, the other side is not missing. That's good, but this side is missing. So that's okay. Well, this car is looking all right for the age, and looking at that interior, I don't know. This is AC drain. Don't see anything with it. Looks open. Let's go talk about the main concern with this car. So we go to the main concern of this car. Customer says he was concerned about the water pump and concerned about the idler pulleys. There's a little bit of noise. There's a squeaking noise. He did replace the belt. Squeaking noise still there, as you can hear here. So, in order to properly check this and make sure the water pump is good and everything, we're going to need to take the belt off. Let's take the belt off. Let's check all the pulleys and make sure we get a full image for this customer so we can see what's going on. In order to remove the belt, let's pull this out. And this is supposed to have a clip here, but the clip, of course, is broken and gone. First, let's look at our water pump. I don't see any leaks, anything leaking here. But let's remove our belt. And the cool thing about the 2GR is this is a tensioner right here, and most people complain about it being very tight and very hard to reach. But there's actually a lock. Do you see this hole right here? You can actually get a bolt and lock the tensioner, and that way you can remove the belt, put it on without having to fight with the tensioner. So let me do that and I'll show you how that looks. I hope you saw that. Here's the bolt that I put on. It just locks the tensioner, and now your belt is loose. So we can pull the belt. You don't have to pull it all the way out, but we can easily pull the belt, put it on, and then kind of put tension on the tensioner and pull that bolt out. So let's do that. Okay, well, here's our belt. Okay, that's good enough. Let's check our first idler here. I'm spinning this guy. This guy looks good. There's the idler for the, not the tensioner pulley. Oh, that guy. I hope you can hear that. So the tensioner pulley is gone. And there's another idler at the top. That one is good. So we have the tensioner pulley is making noise, but let's look at the water pump. So you're gonna want to, oh yes, this bearing is gone. I hope you can hear it. We can actually hear. I want you to see this. See this pulley for the, that has all kinds of play, and that's ready to launch. And then when you spin it, it makes all kinds of noise. But the main thing is the play. That water pump is done. We're gonna need a new water pump here. Okay, so here's the situation with the Avalon. We need quite a bit of work, and this customer already done quite a bit of work. See, this is a situation when you go buy a used car with high miles and you do not do potentially a pre-purchase inspection. Now, I have two things we're going to talk about. The first thing is the shop that did the work. They missed the water pump, they missed the idler, the tensioner pulley, they missed the power steering line leaking, they missed the CV boot leaking, they missed maybe the head gasket situation. That is not as big of a deal. That we're actually, I'm going to tell the customer, this is not a concern at the moment. They missed the radiator as well. I mean, this is the problem. When you do an inspection on a car that came in, you have to inspect everything. And unfortunately, and I love my brethrens, but there are some mechanics out there who will only inspect what they feel comfortable doing. You know what? Some mechanics might not feel comfortable tearing into this thing doing a water pump, but you have to give the whole picture. If you're not qualified to do some jobs, you got to tell the customer and then flat out tell them, hey, this is not something we're comfortable doing at this shop. Maybe take it somewhere else for that one job. Everything else we can do. That's okay. But you got to give the customer a full picture. Because here's this customer that just did all brakes all around, replaced the brackets in the back. I don't know why they replaced it, because you could have saved those, but they replaced it. Then you did all the suspension work, and when I went to drive the car, here's how the steering wheel is. Yep, that is very off-center, because they actually did not do an alignment. I understand some shops will not have an alignment machine. You know, it's a very expensive $30,000, $40,000 machine, but at least take it to a shop that can have an alignment machine, get it aligned, and then add it to the bill. Tell the customer, hey, we're going to sublet the alignment somewhere else. So when you get the car, it's perfect. Alignment is dead on. Because when I went to drive this thing, it's all over the road. The alignment is way off, and this is going to start chewing up the tires. This is not good. The plan of action with this car is we need that water pump. That is the top priority. That has play. That pulley, that bearing completely fails and breaks, it's either going to lock up the water pump, throw the belt, now we have a problem, or worse, break off and potentially damage a lot more things. So that's the top priority. The second thing is that power steering line is leaking pretty good. Our fluid is low. The rack and pinion is not leaking, so that's good because that's very expensive on these. But that line needs to be taken care of. And the other thing is the radiator. If we're gonna, and this is where you have, as a professional mechanic, you have to explain to your customers what's going on and how the chain of events work. In order to do the water pump, I'm gonna drain the coolant. Well, if I tell you this radiator, it's not leaking as bad, but we're going to drain the coolant. You're going to pay $20, $30, $40 for coolant. And then you're going to pay for me to bleed the system. And then let's say 2 months later, this radiator decided to start gushing out. Well, now we're going to come back again, drain the coolant again, do this whole thing. I will charge you again for coolant and again for the bleeding. This is not good practice. If the water pump was fine, I would tell them, let's keep an eye on this radiator. When it gets bad, we'll replace it. But since we are working on the cooling system, I need to give this car back to the customer, telling him your coolant system is reliable now. I can't do that with the radiator like that. So now we're going to recommend the radiator, recommend the water pump, let the customer know that the radiator we're replacing because we are opening the cooling system. If they're on a budget, they can't really afford it, whatever the case may be, then they can make that decision. But for me as a mechanic, this is what we're going to tell them. The tensioner is another situation. The tensioner, unfortunately, is a nightmare on this engine. You have to pull the AC compressor out because the tensioner sits behind the AC compressor and it turns into a big job that is a high labor job. But a common shortcut is to replace the pulley only. It's actually a reverse thread bolt. You just take it out, take the pulley, but when you buy the part, you can't get the pulley alone. You have to buy the whole tensioner. So again, this is a moment where we tell the customer, you want to replace the whole tensioner, here's the price. If this is too much, which I believe the tensioner should be okay, we'll talk about that in a little bit, we can just swap the pulley out of the new tensioner and you keep that tensioner, the part, don't throw it out, and I'm not gonna throw it out. In case we have issues in the future, then I guess we have to dig into it and do it. You have the part already, you paid for it already, we're not going to charge you again for parts. The other small concern that I have, and this comes from experience with these things, that squeaking noise that you heard when we ran the engine, that could be because the water pump is wobbling and it's making the belt hit the edges and it's squeaking. But it could also be an alternator. Something with these alternators and these V6s, they love to make that squeaking noise and it's really hard to diagnose. There's actually no way to diagnose this other than try to put a belt, see what happens, and you really have to listen in to hear it. But that's something I will warn him about it. Otherwise, the interior is a little shot. The air filter needs a little bit of attention, but that is the least of our worries right now because it's there, it's secure. Yeah, the tape is horrible, but we have bigger issues and more important stuff. Folks, just because a car is a Toyota and they're really fine cars and they're reliable doesn't mean that you go blindly and buy one. That interior would be the biggest red flag for me buying this car because what you can see will highly reflect on what you can't see. Not always. When you see a car with an interior that is all tore up like that, well, what kind of care did this previous owner have for the rest of the car? And in this case, not very much, because we already needed brakes, we already needed all the suspension work, and now we have a lot more work. At this point, it's like you're spending all this money to maintain this car. Wouldn't it have been better just to buy a nicer car that is more expensive to begin with? See, that's where it becomes. Now, if you're a DIY mechanic and you already inspected these things when you're buying the car and you know about it and you're like, you know what, this will cost me $2,000 if I take it to a mechanic, but if I do it myself, it's $500 in parts only, and then a couple weekends that are ruined, me wrenching on the car and breaking things, that's okay. But this is going to be much when you don't wrench yourself. And now I don't know how much you paid for this car, but let's say you paid $7,000, $8,000. Now you tack on the $2,000 on top of it to fix all the other stuff. Well, now we're well into the $10,000, $11,000 range. Might as well just would have bought a much lower miles, very nice, pristine example, and you won't have to do all this. See, these are the decisions that I want you to make when you go look for a car. So folks, I'll convene with the customer, we'll see what they want to do, and if you decided to do this water pump, maybe this will be a DIY video for you guys to see how to do this water pump without pulling the engine out, of course. I hope this video is helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.